A surprise berth to the playoffs last year has Canadiens fans very excited. Add that with an aggressive offseason with trades, and the Montreal Canadiens look like a serious team to be worried about for the coming years. But will a young core regress going into their second year together? Or will they be able to keep pushing and prove the Canadiens are a consistent playoff team? This is the 2025-26 Deep Dive on the Montreal Canadiens. Hello and welcome to team number 16 on my preseason power rankings, the Montreal Canadiens. And Montreal is such an interesting team for me because they have this young nucleus of players that might be the most exciting core in the NHL, or one of them. And we really saw that kind of come together last season, right? Like we saw the Caufield, Suzuki, and Slafkovsky line really carrying them through the last third of the season and being this driver for what was an incredible push for a playoff spot, and they ended up getting in. And doing that really, I think, gave this team a ton of experience. I mean, obviously, Lane Hutson won the Calder as well, so we saw the real movement from those four really being the drivers of this team. And then you're adding guys like, Ivan Demidov's going to be here for a full season, obviously. They trade for Noah Dobson, which was a big move. They trade for Zach Bolduc, too, who I actually really like, and we'll talk about him in a second. But I think the cautious optimism I have around Montreal going into this season doesn't say anything about where I think this team's going to go. I think Montreal is building a fantastic roster. I don't know if their forward core specifically is particularly deep enough. You'll see that as we kind of go through here. I do have some trepidations about this forward core. But in saying that, that's more for this season rather than for the future. I think that the Canadiens have a treasure trove of players who can fill those spots, right? I think there's a bunch of players in Laval that could easily step up and replace the Brandon Gallaghers and the Josh Andersons of the world. But there is some concerns I do have with the Canadiens that I think are legitimate and might lower my expectations for what this team can be this season. And I think that's important to kind of mention as we go through here, because there is a lot of things to really like about this team. There's a ton of things to really like about them. And the danger in that is that because they have this really exciting group, a lot of those worries can kind of get pushed down because of how exciting most of this team is. So I'm gonna highlight those, but this is not me trying to say that the Canadiens aren't good. I think this team is exceptionally prepared to be very good in the future. There's just a couple kind of things in the middle to bottom of the roster that need to be fixed, and those are honestly the easiest things to do. I think the top of this roster is already very good, and it's super young, and that's a fantastic combination to have if you're Montreal, and most of them are locked up to deals, right? Obviously Lane Hutson isn't yet, but he just played his first full season in the NHL, and of course Ivan Demidov as well. But the nucleus aside from those guys is pretty locked up. So you have this team that's very young and is going to be together for a long time, and it creates this very easy ability for Kent Hughes and company to be very aggressive in things like the trade market and free agency. And we saw that this year, right? We saw them bring in Noah Dobson, who I absolutely love, and we're going to talk about Noah Dobson because I adore Noah Dobson. I think he's an incredible defenseman. But I just wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that there is things that I'm going to point out with this team that aren't that give me reason to be concerned for this season. But I don't think any of the concerns I'm going to bring up are things that I'm worried about long term, right? So I'm going to talk about the issues I have with the roster today, but I'm understanding that those things probably aren't going to exist in 2 or 3 years. But regardless of the fact, Canadiens fans want to be a playoff team, so I'm going to treat them like they're a playoff team. And here we go. We look at their rankings here, and the offensive one is the one that kind of jumps out first here, and obviously 21st in offense. And a lot of that is because of I don't really like the depth aside from really that top line, really top couple guys, top line plus Ivan Demidov. And I do think that is a concern that really wasn't addressed this year, right? Zach Bolduc helps, but I don't know if he's a needle mover for what the top six needs. Zach Bluke certainly isn't a second line center. And that's kind of the biggest worry I have with this team is just the second line center spot is still very up in the air, and I don't know if there's anybody on this team that can really fill it. We've never really seen that from Kirby Dach. Even when he's been healthy, he really hasn't been an effective 2C. He's been better as a third line guy. The defense I have 16th, and again, I think it's the top third of this blue line is very, very good. I just don't know if they have as much dynamic play in the bottom half, especially the bottom pair. But even then, like, it's just, most of it is just, it needs time, right? Like Lane Hutson had an amazing first season. Like, he's going to get better, right? Caden Gooley's gotten better every season. You know, David Reinbacher, for what you think he might still be, hasn't touched the NHL yet. So, like, it's more just the blue line needs some time than I think the blue line's bad. But, you know, middle of the pack right now with how young it is actually pretty good. Goaltending is 14th. I am, like, maybe the biggest Sam Montembeault fan in the world. I think he's incredible, and we're going to talk about him, and that's really what's lifting this goaltending duo up, because I guess trio, if you count, you know, Kokkonen and what he might be, but Dobish is probably going to be the guy that gets the look to start, I'd assume, but it's really kind of up in the air there. And then obviously, you know, you have Jacob Fowler behind that, who I don't think is going to get a ton of play unless one of those two backups really struggles. But I think giving him another year in the American League isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I mean, obviously, Jacob Fowler is probably the second best goalie on the team right now. I just don't know if it's worth using him as a backup unless you know, one of the other two goalies really falters. The special teams, particularly the penalty kill, concerns me a little bit. Obviously, losing Joel Armia, who we just talked about in the LA video, is tough. That's a pretty substantial loss to a penalty kill. I mean, he's been one of the best penalty killers in the league, period, for the last couple years, and losing him is definitely something that I'd be a little bit concerned about for a penalty kill that already wasn't great. And the power play is fine. Like, I'm not. They have I mean, that first power play is going to be okay, but it's just they need to prove themselves, right? Like, guys like Ivan Demidov, obviously are going to be really good on the power play, but I haven't seen enough of them yet, so their ratings kind of skewed down because of that. And then coaching culture 12th, I really like the management team. I love Martin St. Louis as a head coach. I think it's a really solid group. That proved themselves this season, right? Like, they made the playoffs despite the holes in the roster last season. They were still able to make the playoffs, and I think that says a lot about how St. Louis has helped these players grow and get the confidence that he's given them, even though I do have concerns about the defensive structure on the team, because I think the defensive structure is pretty poor. But those are things that can be kind of addressed throughout the season. Again, like, we're talking about a guy who was, you know, a Jack Adams contender this season, and I don't really see much wrong with that. And obviously, I mean, the management team's done a really good job. I've had issues with the Canadiens drafting, but I mean, the trades have basically all been phenomenal. The free agent moves, although limited, have been very good as well. But I think, like, Ken Hughes has done a phenomenal job winning basically every trade he's been a part of, or at least being a wash in every trade that he's been a part of, and being able to correct his mistakes. And I think that's kind of a big deal for me. But yeah, that's kind of the overall look of the Canadiens here. And as we jump into the management team, I think you'll kind of see the outlook that I have for them, right? I mean, Ken Hughes is B+. Again, like, the only 1 year of the playoffs is kind of what drops him out of the A category, and his drafting, I don't think has been. I don't think he's maximized his picks as much as I would have liked. Although he hasn't really missed on a lot of them, like, he hasn't, like, completely whiffed. But I do think that he hasn't really maximized his potential for each pick, aside from Ivan Demidov, who really just landed in his lap, and obviously Lane Hutson. But even then, I mean, he's a second-round pick. Everybody missed on Lane Hutson. So, like, I just that's kind of my one criticism of Ken Hughes, and it's really not that big of a criticism. Like, I don't think he's been bad at drafting. I just don't think he's maximized. Like, I think he's been good enough, but he hasn't fully maximized the potential of his picks, right? Like, I think, you know, passing on Michkov over Reinbacher was something that I ripped on at the time, right? I think passing on Cooley for Slafkovsky was a mistake, and I don't think you're going to get much pushback. Logan Cooley's a better player at this point, and as a center, which is something this team really needs. But like again, like I'm not saying that though. I mean, we haven't seen David Rambacher play, but he's looked good in Laval, to be fair. And Slafkovsky's been fine. So like they're not busts, right? Like Slafkovsky's an NHL player, which is good. That's good. Just things like that is kind of what takes him down, and the fact they've only made the playoffs once, which isn't his fault. The team was awful before then. But just I can't really go into the A's for a team that hasn't proven fully that the plan works yet, and so that's why B+ is kind of the highest I could go. But that's really not a shot at Kent Hughes. I think he's done a fantastic job for what he's been, and this is like the highest grade I can give him based on where the team is. Basically, hopefully that makes sense. Martin St. Louis, on the other hand, again, fantastic job since he's come in. I've even when they were losing at the start of the season, I had zero worry about it because he was playing the kids, right? Like, and this is kind of like the epitome of what I think Martin St. Louis has done really well, and a lot of coaches should pay attention to, because I think a lot of coaches can stifle growth by not doing this. But at the beginning of the year, Lane Hutson was like awful for just taking unnecessary risks with the puck. And it was really, really apparent, right? Like he had the talent, like it was there, but he really had trouble making smart choices consistently, both with and without the puck. And instead of not giving him ice time, like a lot of coaches will do with young players, where they'll be like, okay, well, you can now watch, what Mike Matheson does with it instead. Martin St. Louis kept playing him. I think he increased his minutes, actually, and he let him kind of learn while playing through it. And I think that really, really helped. Like, I don't think Lane Hutson has the end of the season as strong as he did if Martin St. Louis doesn't give him that opportunity. And he's done this with everybody, right? He did this with Cole Caufield, and Cole Caufield has been struggling to score. Like, he's just given him the first line minutes forever, right? Same with Slafkovsky early in his rookie year, he was struggling. And St. Louis never really, like, he moved around a bit, but he never really punished him with ice time. And I think that's so important when you're developing young players, and that's like exactly how I've harped on developing young players, because so many teams, like we saw it in Philly this year, right? Like Michkov was sitting in games, like he was getting healthy scratched, he was playing fourth line minutes, and it's like you're not going to learn as a young player playing 6 minutes a night watching Sean Couturier play a completely different style of hockey than you play. It just doesn't work. And Martin St. Louis has done an excellent job allowing his young players to learn from like their mistakes on the ice, and like understand that like, oh, if I do this is what's going to happen. And that helps so much more than watching somebody else play or watching it in film, is just actually learning on the ice. And that's been easily my favorite thing that he's done. Now, I think that as a motivator, he's been fantastic too. I would like to see the Canadiens bring in some more tactical assistant coaches, because the defensive structure on the Canadiens is extremely poor. Their in-zone coverages is not very good, and that does worry me slightly as this team wants to keep pushing the playoffs, and that really got exposed in the Capitals series. So I think finding a way to allow Martin St. Louis to still be the coach that he is, or he can just improve those, but like I think it'd just be easier to bring in some really strong defensive, especially assistant coaches. But that's really my only concern with him. I said the team's vibey. I don't know really where else to put them. They're the only team that really fits that mold, and I don't really know what that means, but like they're just fun. They have a good aura around them, and I think that they're significantly better than the sum of their parts, and the sum of their parts is pretty good. So looking at their numbers from last year, this is kind of what I'm talking about, where I have concerns about this team regressing. And 17th in goals for, 10th in expected goals for, pretty much lines up with what Evolving Hockey has. That's fine, and that's going to get better, right? Like I think as this team develops and as they start, graduating some of their other prospects, I do think the goal scoring is going to go up. Like you have all this talent up front, and the team's only 17th in goals for. Like I think that does speak to the lack of secondary scoring on this team, which was a big concern last year going into the playoffs. But obviously like the top end scoring was able to get them in anyway. But that does lead to some concerns for me, kind of looking at this team and seeing what they can kind of become. I think the secondary scoring is definitely an issue, and we're going to talk about it. The goals against obviously is the biggest issue here. 32nd in expected goals against. Evolving Hockey doesn't have them that bad, but still like not good at all. And 27th in goals against, also really bad. So there isn't a lot on this team that I think they did this summer that's going to improve that. I think Noah Dobson's a better defender than people give him credit for, but I don't think he's significantly good enough to elevate those numbers. And neither is Zach Balduke, who again is a fine defensive forward, but not to the extent of being a big contributor. So I look at this and I really do think that the system, being as poor as it is defensively, is like the reason for most of these defensive issues. And I that's why I really think like creating something that is easier for players to grasp might be useful. And it comes from like, this is kind of the issue with having a coach that's never been a coach at any level before comes in, because I think for everything that Martin St. Louis done really, really well, my concern is just the system itself isn't very good, right? And he's allowing these star players to really just do their thing, which is awesome for the offensive development, but I do think they need some more structure defensively. And hopefully that comes this year. Hopefully the team also recognizes that and they can kind of address that, because that's kind of my biggest concern. The power play I'm not worried about. Obviously, like a full season of Ivan Demidov on your first line power plays, it should solve most of those issues. I do think the penalty kill takes a bit of a step back. Their expected numbers on the penalty kill were significantly worse than the amount of goals they actually let in. And again, losing Joel Armia is going to be a pretty big deal for that, because he is one of the best penalty killers in the league, and I don't think they have anybody that can really replace him, at least on a 1-to-1 scale. So I do think the penalty kill takes a bit of a step back in that sense. We jump into the offense here, and the offense is very interesting, right? I think there's some parts of this offense that I really like. Like, obviously Nick Suzuki rocks. I've like as a first line center, he's absolutely become a first line center in the NHL, and I think that's super valuable for this team, because I didn't necessarily know if that was the peak he was going to get to, and he has. You have Slafkovsky and Caufield that have come together and formed this really good line. Now I think Slafkovsky's numbers are being inflated because of the other two players on the team, but that's just kind of the reality of it. I'm going to dive into Slafkovsky a little bit, but if people really want to fight me on that, I can do a full 20-minute breakdown of why that's the case. But Slafkovsky's been fine. He's fit. He's played the role that they've needed him to play very well, especially last season in the second half. And I think that's all. That's fine, right? Like, he is what he is in that role. But my issues really for this team come below that. I mean, Ivan Demidov is great, and his rating again is mostly based on what he's done in the past. So there's that. But Zach Balduke was brought in. I don't know if I'd love Zach Balduke as my, fifth best forward on this team. But that's the reality of where they are. I think that the depth on this team is pretty porous. And then Kirby Dach, obviously, even when he's healthy, I don't think he's a second line center at this point, and I don't know if this team has anybody behind him that can really fill that. Like, Jake Evans is a better third line center, Kirby Dach's a better third line center, Newhook's probably better as your fourth. Then you have Anderson, Laine, and Gallagher, who are all just kind of there at this point. Brandon Gallagher's a great heart and soul player for this team, but he's not particularly effective anymore at this point in his career. Josh Anderson is wildly inconsistent, and obviously we all know what Patrick Laine is. He's an elite scorer, but that's really about it. He's a great spot-up shooter, and it's hard to bury that on this team, because this is a team that desperately needs a defensive presence in the bottom six. And unfortunately, you have to bury Patrick Laine in the bottom six, because his goal scoring is still effective enough that it brings value to the team. But you really have to shelter him, and that's basically taking up a spot for somebody who could be a defensive winger. I don't love the Sammy Blais acquisition. I really hope that spot gets taken up by another young player, and I think it probably will at the end of camp. But as of now, Puckpedia has him on the roster, so that's what I went with for consistency. But I would have liked to see them even add a cheap defensive bottom of the lineup winger. I think they could have thrown the money at Victor Olofsson and put him in there. I think he would have fit pretty well what this team's going to try to do, and would have been able to play center too, so you could have had more flexibility there. But obviously went to Colorado, so that is what it is. But Victor Olofsson's kind of my fantasy booking player for a lot of these teams. let's talk about Nick Suzuki. Nick Suzuki's fun. Offensively, Nick Suzuki rocks. He's a extremely effective play driver. His goal scoring ability has went up. His playmaking ability has improved every single season. His defensive ability, I still think he gets more credit than he deserves as a defensive center. I don't think that he's a Selke level defender, and I don't know if he's necessarily going to get to that level in his career, and he doesn't have to, right? Like, that's not a shot against him. I just think that his defensive ability has been a little overstated. Now, in saying that, I do think that he gets hurt somewhat by playing with Caufield and Slafkovsky, and most of the time now with Lane Hutson behind him too. Like, he's not playing with a bunch of guys who can really make up for bad defense. So I'll give him a bit of a pass there, but overall, I mean, Nick Suzuki's proved he can be a first-line center. I think that his development should continue, at least for another couple of years. Obviously, he's getting into his prime now, his age 27 season, which is crazy. But I do think that we'll see this level at least from Suzuki for the next couple of years, which I think is good enough for what Montreal needs as a first-line center. Again, like, I think prioritizing getting a second-line center is key for this team, and as of now, they haven't. And I'm worried a little bit that could be the downfall for what this team wants to do this season, right? Like, I think they're an injury away from really, really struggling in terms of what they should be down the middle. And I think that if Kirby Dach has to be your number one line center at some point this year, that's extremely fragile, right? If he goes down, right? If Kirby Dach goes down, on the other hand, then having Newhook or Evans step in is going to be tough as well. So I do think having some stability behind him should be there. I mean, that's easier said than done. There really wasn't anything on the market to fill that need, unless you wanted to pay Mikael Granlund an absorbent amount of money, which and no team really wanted to do. So there really isn't a whole lot on the market. Obviously, Canadiens fans are hoping that the answer is Sidney Crosby. I'm less optimistic about that, but who knows? But I don't think you can't really bet on that being the solution to the team, right? I mean, the other solution obviously is Connor McDavid hitting free agency next season. But again, like, that's not an option, right? Like, I'm sure if Connor McDavid hits the market, 31 teams are going to be calling him. That's not really like that's not a solution to a problem, right? Like, I would have liked to see them be a little bit more productive in trying to do something interesting for the center spot. And I know there wasn't a whole lot out there, so I can't really rip on them too much for it, because that's kind of my rule here, is that there really wasn't a fix out there that was like readily available. But like, I hope that the Canadiens were making some interesting phone calls to teams on players that wouldn't necessarily be projected to be on the market. I just hope that was happening. Whether or not it led to anything, obviously it didn't to this point, but I hope those conversations were happening. Cole Caufield, again, an excellent scorer, right? Like, phenomenal goal scorer. And his playmaking ability actually kind of took an underrated boost last year. His ability to create primary assists was actually very high, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are committing to him so much as a shooter now that his ability to just kind of dump the puck back off to somebody else is almost as dangerous as his shooting, because of how much teams are going to be, pressuring him as a shooter, right? And that was the one part of like Alex Ovechkin's game. I know that's a crazy comparison, but I'm just talking about shooters. That like guys like Ovechkin, even Patrick Laine, never really developed. Like, they never were able to turn into somebody who could flip a play back on the other side. And for Ovechkin, I mean, he didn't have to. He was just, he's scoring 50 goals a season. It didn't really matter. But for Cole Caufield, I really appreciate that that's become part of his game, is that his playmaking has actually taken a step forward. Defensively, he's awful. I don't think there's much argument against that. But I do think that his offensive capability should be able to outweigh some of those defensive lapses. And he's never going to be put in defensive situations anyway, so it's like not a huge deal. You can shelter him in the top of the lineup and it's fine. But I'm really I'm curious to see how he continues to develop, because I think, again, like, there's so much potential for him to take another step forward, and I think we could really see him develop into like the Alex DeBrincat archetype, where like DeBrincat's become better defensively, and is still like a pretty potent, like, toolsy offensive player. And I think if Cole Caufield can continue to develop his rush offense and his playmaking, he'd become a lot more of a dual threat player offensively, and I think that does help offset the defensive lapses. So just becoming more dynamic offensively kind of brings up his value as well. So I'm glad that he's not really just developing into a pure shooter, which was kind of the concern in his draft. And he's really starting to develop into more of a dynamic player. And I do think that, like, of all the players on the Canadiens, Cole Caufield has benefited the most from Martin St. Louis, because Martin St. Louis is literally like the same player, aside from having like a less potent shot. But like in terms of build, in terms of skill set, they're extremely similar players, and I think that's helped Cole Caufield kind of learn his like what he can do and kind of his limitations. Juraj Slafkovsky is a fascinating player, because people love to, and I mean, Slafkovsky's going into his age 21 season, right? I want to caveat that with this. Like, this isn't the end of what Slafkovsky's going to be. And as an offensive creator, he's actually gotten significantly better. He really started to develop that at the end of like last season or 2 seasons ago. And he stayed pretty consistent last season as well, just as somebody who can kind of be the more aggressive, like digging in the corners player for the Canadiens, and that's what they needed on that line, right? Like, you have Suzuki and Caufield, who are both going to be really dynamic at the puck. Slafkovsky isn't a pretty skater. He's not a great puck handler. He's fine. He gets by, especially for at least for like a first line standard. But they don't need him to be the puck carrier in this line, right? Like, his job essentially is just to be the bigger body, kind of the power forward on the line, and he's done that to the extent of what he should, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, like, defense is an issue. He's not a fantastic defender. I really don't think that he should be on the first line power play. I think they have enough talent that you just load up that first line with just elite talent, and they can just never give the puck up. And just I'd like to see him just kind of develop a more well-rounded game. And he's not quite there yet. Obviously, he's turning 21 in this season. I understand. But I think, especially for a first overall pick, like, that's going to be the standard that we're holding him to until he, really falls off that. I need to see a more dynamic Juraj Slafkovsky. And he's fitting the role that they've placed him in well enough. But I think there's still a lot more that he can give, and I'm curious to see what the Canadiens can get out of him. Because if he's your third best, I mean, he's going to be, at the end of next season, I think he's the 4th best forward on the Canadiens, with Demidov jumping into the top 3. And if you can either, if that's kind of where he's going to be, as the 4th, 5th best forward on the team, then I think that's a lot better for what he probably is. I've never been a big Slafkovsky fan, and I don't think he's really shown me anything during his career so far that's made me change my mind on that, really. I think he's been good. Like, he hasn't been bad, but he's certainly not a bust. But I just need to see a bit more dynamic play from him, especially for somebody who was a first overall pick in a draft with multiple centers. Like, I need to see a little bit more from him to justify, especially the position cost of taking a winger over a couple centers. And even if you look at his numbers compared to Shane Wright in terms of the analytics of it, and the point totals, they're pretty similar. They're not. I believe I did that in the Seattle video. So I'm not saying I would have taken Shane Wright. Don't attack me in the comments, but I definitely would have taken Logan Cooley over him, especially for what the Canadiens need right now. And hopefully he can prove me wrong this year, right? Like, I'm wishing Slafkovsky all the best. He seems like a great guy. And I do like him as a player. I think that there's still a lot more that you can get out of him, hopefully. And, going into the age 21 season, there's still a lot of room for development. So, that's kind of the hope, is that they can continue to get the most out of a guy they took first overall. Ivan Demidov is. I love Ivan Demidov, man. I was banging the drum for Ivan Demidov being better than Michkov a year out from the draft. I was very adamant on the fact that he would have went second overall if he was in the Bedard draft. And I still believe that. I think Ivan Demidov is an incredibly dynamic offensive creator. I think his ability to to just manipulate defenses with his skating and his puck handling is so unique for a player, and we saw that. I mean, we saw that the second he stepped on the ice, right? Like in his first game, he was doing that to teams, and I just think like there's very, very little bust potential in what Ivan Demidov is as a player. Now, again, he's not going to be the greatest defensively, and it's like that's fine. Like I don't like if the Canadiens want to play an all-out offensive game and just score 5-6 goals a game, go ahead. Like I think that'd be fun. And Ivan Demidov's gonna be a big part of that. I am so bullish on what Ivan Demidov can be this year. He's clearly my Calder pick. Going into this season, I think he's everybody's Calder pick going into this season, pretty much. And I can picture how incredibly dynamic this power play is going to be with Ivan Demidov on it, right? Like a Caufield, Suzuki, Demidov, and Hutson power play is just like the idea of that is terrifying for the next decade. Like that's an incredible spoil of riches for what Montreal is going to be when this team is at their peak, and it's very, very scary to think about from any other team's perspective. And even then, like 5-on-5 wise, like this guy being on a different line than Suzuki and Caufield, I think is kind of the play. Like I think building a second line around Ivan Demidov is the play. Like I don't think putting him on that line should be the long-term move because you can spread out the talent so much better, right? Like Suzuki and Caufield are already pretty dynamic offensive creators, and then having another line with an Ivan Demidov and building kind of a group of players around him really, really makes the Canadiens such a threat in the top six. And I am concerned a little bit that that Montreal doesn't have enough dynamic players to play with them this season, and I was kind of hoping they were going to address that. That was one of my big things that I would have liked to see them really push for, is getting those secondary players that maybe aren't even like true second line talents, but just guys who could, complement Demidov's game better in the on 5-on-5, and I don't know if they did that specifically. Like I don't think Zach Bolduc is the player to do that. I would be interested to see him play with Patrick Laine a little bit, to be honest with you. That would kind of be intriguing, just with how good Ivan Demidov is as a playmaker and a puck handler. I think he could be the setup man for Patrick Laine on a line. I think that would be intriguing to me. I don't know how much leeway the Canadiens are going to give Patrick Laine in a top six role, but I think that in spurts and offensive kind of situations, I think that's an interesting combination to explore, and I really hope they do, because you might be able to kind of squeeze some life out of what Laine can bring to this team in that sense, and we didn't really see it a ton in the playoffs, obviously, or at the end when Demidov was playing. So I think that kind of being able to get something out of Laine there is important for this season in terms of getting that secondary scoring, and I would be interested to see him play with Demidov a bit and just see if giving Demidov kind of a pure scorer like that would be able to not only open the ice up for Laine, but also open the ice up for Demidov even more. And that could be very interesting in terms of what the offensive potential there could be, although the defense would be pretty bad. Speaking of Zach Bolduc, we talked about him enough. Zach Bolduc had a really underrated rookie season. He's somebody that I really like. The analytics really like them. Now, offensively, he's not a dynamic offensive player, at least wasn't his rookie season. Again, these are all rookie numbers, so take it with a grain of salt. Things could change pretty drastically for a rookie. But his defensive numbers were already pretty good. Like, he was putting up, his ability to stop rushes was actually pretty good. He was able to, his defensive puck touches were really good on a St. Louis team that was actually pretty good defensively. He was able to enter the zone very well with the puck. He was able to stop, to exit the zone fairly decently. His ability to clog lanes was really good. His stick work was very good. He was also brought a bit of a physical presence. to the defensive zone, which again I think is something that isn't necessarily lacking on the Canadiens, but it's something that they probably want to improve, especially in their forward core. Like aside from Josh Anderson, there isn't a ton of that physicality on the offensive side. So I like as a player, like I think Zach Bolduc is very good, and I think he'll fit what the Canadiens are trying to do. I'm concerned that if he's the option on the second line, that worries me slightly. Again, like I would have liked to see them bring in another top 6 forward. I think there were enough available, right? Like I think even like a Gustav Nyquist on like a 1-year deal or something, like even offering him the same deal the Jets did, I don't think would have been bad just as a stopgap, as a middle 6, like more interesting offensive player. I would have liked that a little bit more, and then you have Bolduc on the third line, and then you could have brought in like a Victor Olofsson, which is the guy I thought of. For the fourth line, I think that creates a much more intriguing, offensive mix. Although I do like Zach Bolduc, like this isn't a shot at him. I just don't know if playing him in the top 6 is the right role for him, at least to start. But in terms of being, a defensive forward on this team, that will definitely help what Montreal's trying to do. Like his defensive ability was already very good. His expected goals against on in multiple models was very good. So I think that getting that will help the Canadiens overall, because this offense desperately needs some players who can play defense. So in that sense, like he fits the team really well. I just don't know if he's like a top 6 winger, and I don't know who else is on this team, unless you want to throw Patrick Laine up there like I just suggested. Kirby Dach concerns me. Kirby Dach as the 2C on the Canadiens just isn't the right fit at this point. I think that even when he's been healthy, and that's been a big if, he hasn't shown the dynamic ability to lead a line. He's not a very good defender. He's not a very dynamic offensive creator. He's put up points, but his points have been he's been okay on the power play. That's where a lot of his point totals have come from when he's been healthy. But 5-on-5, like you really need a I think even his season where like his highest points season, I think like almost half his points came on the power play. You really need somebody who can be more dynamic than what Kirby Dach is. I think Kirby Dach is your 3C, and on the power play, it is fine, I guess. Like I don't know if that's really moving the needle either, but it's better. I just think wanting him to be a second line center at this point is a big risk, right? You're talking about a guy. Obviously, he's only going to his age 25 season, which is he's 2 years younger than Suzuki, so there's potential that he could turn it around. But there's just the lack of a safety net behind him. Like I would have much rather seen them bring in a second line center. Again, there wasn't a lot available, so I can't really, like, this is more fantasy booking. I get there wasn't a lot there to do, but bringing in some kind of second line option, and then if Dach can prove that he can be healthy and be a very good contributor, then all of a sudden you have a very, very strong center core, right? But now you're kind of banking on Kirby Dach playing a full season, right? And he played 57 games last year, which was one of his highest games played of his career. But then you're also banking on him also developing very substantially, right? You're banking on two things happening kind of at once, and that's a lot to ask, especially for a team that's going to try to make the playoffs. And not having a second line center is a very difficult way to try to make the playoffs, right? Especially in the division that they're in. The Atlantic isn't going to do them very many favors. I have concerns about what that could look like overall as a product by the end of it. And if the Canadiens do end up missing the playoffs, I think one of the big reasons why is they didn't have a 2C. And that's the unfortunate reality of it. Jake Evans is somebody that Canadiens fans might point to as somebody who might be able to become that second line center, and I don't see it. Jake Evans is a strong fourth line center. He can jump up into the middle 6 if you need him to in case of injury, like we saw last year. But I think last year, in terms of like his point totals, it was more of an anomaly than what's going to happen. He wasn't very he very much outscored his expected numbers last season, and I don't think that he'll be able to do that again. He hasn't shown in the past that he's been able to do that, so expecting him to do that consistently now is a stretch. Obviously, it could happen. Anything is possible, but I don't foresee him having the same season that he does unless there is multiple injuries and he gets thrusted into like the second line and just kind of is able to milk points off of guys like Demidov. Then sure, maybe he can replicate his point totals, but it's not going to be from him, driving play or anything, and that's fine. Like he's not that kind of player, and I think that the contract that he got was fine. I don't hate it, but I do have concerns that if what we saw last year from Jake Evans in terms of his offense production is kind of what you're expecting forever, you might be disappointed. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the reality. Defensively, Jake Evans is fine. He's above average as a fourth line center, and I think that's good enough for the role that he's going to play. I think he's played that 4C role pretty solidly throughout his career. But I don't know if you should be expecting anything more than that. And Canadiens fans who think he's the answer at the second line center spot, I don't think are going to be very impressed by the end of the season, and that could be an issue because if he gets asked to do more than he should be, then things could kind of go south for him in terms of that fan base, which is known for turning on people fairly quickly. I mean, we saw it with Patrick Laine, right? Patrick Laine came in and had like his whatever it was, like 12 goal streak or whatever, and everybody loved him, and then all of a sudden he stopped scoring, and then people realized that he's not very good, and the fan base turned on him like in the span of like a month, and it was he went from being like the sole reason why the Canadiens like turnaround in January happened to a guy that nobody wanted on the team in like the span of like 2.5 months, and it was really I don't think that something that drastic is going to happen to Evans, but I'm just I'm saying that the fan base's reaction today could be a lot different in 6 months on a player like Jake Evans, especially if he gets asked to play a bigger role than he has to. But if Kirby Dach's healthy and Alex Newhook's healthy, and they're able to hold down the second and third line center spots, and Kirby Dach regresses back to what he's been his whole career, then there's no problem, and that's fine. Everything's gonna be fine. But in saying that, like I like Jake Evans, I just like him as my bottom line center rather than my second line center. So yeah. Patrick Laine is fun. Like I've said, offensively and defensively, 5-on-5, he doesn't really do much for me. He's not going to generate his own offense. He's going to be able to score. You can give him the puck and he can shoot. But his really only value truly comes on the power play. He is very much a power play specialist, and he's very good at that. He's very good at being a spot-up shooter on the power play, and I think he does really lend himself very well to slot in on the second line on the power play for the Canadiens, because you already have Caufield and now you have Ivan Demidov who can be creators on both sides. So I think like the most value the Canadiens can actually get out of him is playing him on that second line power play and just letting him be the option there. And now all of a sudden you have a legitimate threat to score on both units, which is something a lot of teams lack, right? Like as we went through these teams, one of my big issues has been with basically all of them is the lack of a second option on the second unit or a primary option on the second unit. And Patrick Laine kind of does that for Montreal. So I'd be intrigued to see if that's the route they go. I think it is, because I think putting him on the first unit is kind of redundant for what they want to do. And I think putting Ivan Demidov on the second unit is not the right way to use him. Like I think giving him more space, especially in a situation where you're really limited to a third of the ice, on the first unit is actually the better way to do it. And then giving Patrick Laine the spot on the second unit to just be a guy who can create and be the shot on that unit, running basically like Ovechkin does on the power play and just have him stand in one spot and just spot up shoot, is basically all you can ask for a second unit. In today's NHL, there's not a ton of offense usually coming from those units. Like if your first unit doesn't score on most teams, then your power play is kind of cooked. But in terms of the Canadiens, they could really give themselves a good secondary option there. So that's how I would use him, at least to start, and see how that runs. But I think that he's intriguing in that sense, and I don't think he's like unplayable because of what he can do for this power play, which wasn't great last season. So it got significantly better once Patrick Laine got there. So yeah, I mean 5-on-5, he's not going to be great, and it's hard to bury him because of like the lack of defensiveness on the team as a whole. But I don't think he's unplayable simply because of the value he can bring on the power play. Josh Anderson, I also want to touch on here because he is somebody that Canadiens fans love, and I don't. I get that he's a fun power forward who brings like a physical side and yada yada, but he's an okay offensive creator. His defensive numbers are brutal. They have been for quite some time. He hits a lot, so people like it. His penalty numbers are fine. They're pretty middle of the pack. But there's nothing that Josh Anderson does aside from like bringing energy on a third line that really does a lot for me. And like that's the thing, right? People are like, well, every team needs energy guys, right? Like Brad Marchand was an energy guy in Florida. Yeah, Brad Marchand's also like very, very good at hockey. Right? Like Sam Bennett put up really, really strong numbers as well as being, an annoying player to play against. Right? You can go back. Like guys like Blake Coleman in Tampa Bay is kind of my epitome of that. And then they tried to do the same thing with Tanner Jeannot and it completely fell on their face because Tanner Jeannot, although equally as physical, if not more so, wasn't very good. So I get it. Like I understand that you want to follow that archetype and like you want the physical presence on your third line, but I also want guys who are good at hockey, and Josh Anderson is far too inconsistent for that. Now Josh Anderson can have games where he looks like a legitimate, middle to top six forward, but there's just too many games where he's just non-existent aside from being physical. And I think for the role that they're going to be playing him in and for what this team needs, they need somebody who can be far more dynamic than that. And he really doesn't bring that to this team anymore. And he never really did, to be honest with you. Like I thought from the day they made the Max Domi trade, they had lost it. And, in terms of, I don't think Max Domi on this team fits very well. But in terms of like the caliber of player, I don't think they're very dissimilar in terms of like the value they're bringing to a team right now, and that's not too surprising to me. But he did have a better season last year than the year before, pretty much everywhere. So hopefully, like he can start to become a bit more valuable as like a third liner, but it's just the inconsistency paired with the lack of defensive ability that really gives me pause. Like I think you can find a physical presence that's significantly better for what this team needs than what Josh Anderson brings. Brandon Gallagher is kind of in the same boat. Like he's somebody you can't move at this point. One, because of the contract, and two, because he just feels like he's going to be a lifer in Montreal. For like being the heart and soul guy on this team, and I can forgive Brandon Gallagher a little bit more just because of like what he means to the Canadiens and being here through this whole thing for like over a decade. And he used to be so good. Like I've talked so much about the Danault, Tatar, Gallagher line. I've talked about it in a couple videos now, and this is kind of the place to do it because that line was so good at just being incredibly like just swarming on pucks, just total possession line, just creating chance after chance, and they just didn't have a scorer to consistently finish those. But like Brandon Gallagher was the guy who could get in there and bury pucks, and if he's healthy, like I think he's a more serviceable third liner than Anderson can be in terms of like overall value, although he doesn't bring the physicality. But it's just like, is he going to be healthy? I mean, he's getting old now. His body's clearly starting to give out on him, especially being an undersized, power forward essentially. He doesn't really have the good combination of being undersized and trying to be super physical, which leads to injuries, as we've seen. But if fully healthy, I think he can still be, a spark plug on a third line. And if there's a guy who really deserves to, go on another deep, playoff run and have an opportunity to win a cup, like it's Brandon Gallagher compared to anybody else on this Canadiens team. And he's just been such a unique player in the NHL. There's really not a whole lot of players that have been like Brandon Gallagher. And still to this day there isn't. Like he's such a one of one, and I hope that he can find a bit more of what he had a couple years ago. I don't think that's possible at this point. Like he's kind of over that hump, but if the 2021 Gallagher can come back even at like 60%, then he becomes a really, really effective like middle six guy for this team, and he could even take that second line spot. I just don't know if the likelihood of that is very high at this point because of age and injury history. I think you're asking him to do a lot if that's the case. But as a third liner, energy guy, like I think that he's more serviceable and more consistent than like a Josh Anderson is. Jumping to this blue line, man, this is a fun blue line. I feel like I was a little down for a bit of that, and that's not the intention. Like I do think the Canadiens have a very intriguing mix of players, but I do have concerns about the depth on the Canadiens, and I hope I highlighted that aside from the top guys. But this blue line is kind of a completely different story. Mike Matheson's very much become a power play specialist. His numbers are not very impressive. But you look around this team, I mean, like Caden Gooley has really developed into a very, very good like second defenseman, and now he doesn't even have to do that. He can be the very clear third guy on this team, which is even better, I think. Like I think playing him as a second liner, and if eventually you have, Dobson, Hutson, Gooley, and Reinbacher as your top four, which is probably the idea. That's a very, very formidable top four. I mean, Lane Hutson as an offensive guy is already one of the best defensemen in the league in terms of what he can do offensively. Clearly, Noah Dobson I think is so underrated as a defenseman and is in my top. Like he's one of my top probably 12 to 15 defensemen in the NHL. I don't know if I don't think he's top 10 potential, but I do think like at his peak he is one of the best like 15 defensemen in the NHL. I'm so bullish on what Noah Dobson is. And I think the Canadiens got an absolute like steal for him. I think the two mid first round picks and a fourth liner is extreme value for what he is, and even the contract is very good. Aside from that, I mean, Arbor Xhekaj is what he is. He's a pretty polarizing player. I think he's a fine like sixth defenseman. That's about it. I don't really see a lot of like there's not a ton of upside in what Arbor Xhekaj is, but for what he is, he's fun, and his defensive numbers aren't like egregious for a third pair defenseman, so like it's fine. And like Alex Carrier is this blue line as a whole is actually pretty good defensively, and Alexander Carrier came into Montreal and really helped stabilize what the back end on this team was trying to do. And he's not flashy, but as a bottom of the lineup defensive stable kind of defender, he definitely brought a lot more consistency to a blue line that needed it, and to a team that needed it, especially with guys like Lane Hutson on it. So overall, I really like this blue line. I just think it's more, they just need time to continue to develop, right? Like Caden Gooley at this point, this probably is what he is at this point, more or less, which isn't a bad thing. Like I think he's a solid defenseman as a third guy on a unit, but especially for Noah Dobson, really coming to his own now as a true number one defenseman, and then Lane Hutson obviously is just going to keep getting better. Like, and then of course you have David Reinbacher who might get a shot this season. So overall, like I think this blue line just needs time to mature and to come together, but the pieces are here. Like this blue line I have a lot less concerns about than I do the offense. And I think we could be, especially if David Reinbacher can come in and be like at worst a fourth defenseman on this team, we're looking at one of the best potential blue lines in the NHL in like 2 or 3 years. And that's like if Reinbacher hits that floor of being a fourth D. Like if he can come in and look like a 2 or a 3, like the Canadiens could potentially have 3 guys who could be first pair defensemen, and then Caden Gooley, who very much has been a first pair defenseman, at least in role the last couple of years. I don't know necessarily in talent, but in role he definitely has, and that creates an extremely formidable top four if that's how it plays out. So the floor on this blue line is very, very high, and the ceiling is extremely high too. Like I think it's right now I have them 16th, and they're not even at their full form yet. So like if that's the floor, yeah, man, this blue line's gonna be really good in a couple of years, barring injuries or regression, obviously. But if everything pans out, this blue line's gonna be very good. And it starts with Noah Dobson, and I adore Noah Dobson as a player. I've been a fan of him forever. I think the fact that he doesn't get enough looks for like a Team Canada roster is insane to me. Because he really has become like a very good two-way defenseman. I think a lot of people kind of talk about his 22-23 season as being the year that the defensive numbers weren't very good, and that was the year the Islanders were still like a playoff team, so more eyes were on them at that point, and then people kind of just forgot about the Islanders the last 2 years. And I think that's done Noah Dobson an absolute disservice for what he is, because he's actually improved significantly each of those seasons and has really, really developed into a top pair defenseman. He's only he's going into his age 25 season. There's so much room for him to still develop and be in the prime of his career. Like, this is for a blue line that I was a little concerned about at the end of last season, needing a true like number one staple guy. The Canadiens went out and found him, right? Like, you're, instead of hoping that Caden Gooley can become that, or hoping that Lane Hutson can just be a like Erik Karlsson level offensive creator and make up for the defense, they went out and were like, no, we're just going to go get another number one guy, and a guy who's actually already a number one, which does a couple things. First of all, it legitimizes what the Montreal is doing here on the blue line, and it gives them a guy that they can put out in a lot of different situations and have faith in. But it also takes a lot of the pressure off this young core, because now Lane Hutson can just focus on like honing in his game and not have to be the guy, right? Caden Gooley can continue to develop in a lot less stressful of an environment, right? Like, his role has started to decrease basically every single season, and he's looked better because of it, because it's given him more time to not be under the pressure of having to be the guy on the blue line. And even if, David Reinbacher comes up and plays, like, the pressure on Reinbacher is going to be extremely minimal. And I think that was such a great move, and it was such a weaponized, like, using your assets to acquire a player like this. Like, they basically they took on the Sean Monahan contract, who, by the way, now had an incredible year in Columbus, and they turned eating that cap space into multiple picks, and now Noah Dobson, and it's just incredible, a masterclass in asset management, and that's been Kent Hughes' biggest strength since he's become the GM of this team, is just his ability to maximize his assets. And there's been some teams throughout these videos that I've harped on their GMs not being able to do that. Really, Calgary was a big example of that, where I just don't feel like they've done a good enough job utilizing the assets they've had. And even teams like Chicago was another team that I had kind of ripped on for that. And 2-3 years ago, the Canadiens were in a very similar spot to where Chicago is, where the roster was just a mess. And now all of a sudden they have this extremely good young core. They have a ton of assets still, and they're able to go out and get guys like Noah Dobson and utilize the space and the assets that they've given themselves. And I think that makes them such an interesting team. And I really think that has helped what their overall value is throughout this process. And I love Noah Dobson. I think he's going to be great, and Canadiens fans are going to love him. Lane Hutson, same thing. I mean, like, I don't know what else to say. He's already one of the best offensive defensemen in the NHL, and he's played one season. He set records last year offensively, and I think a lot of, like, an underrated part of his game is his retrievals and exits. Like, he's actually like a good defenseman in terms of retrieving the puck and exiting the zone with it. I do think that his defensive numbers are pretty bad otherwise, but he does create a lot of turnovers too. He's one of the highest in terms of turnovers in the NHL. But that's if you're an offensive defenseman, you're pressuring the puck a lot, you're going to lead to more turnovers. Evan Bouchard is right there. Cale Makar is right in between them. I don't consider either of those defensemen to be particularly good defenders, but it's just if you're an offensive, aggressive defenseman, you're going to naturally create more turnovers. That's just kind of how the nature of playing that position works. So take that with a grain of salt. If that's the metric you're going to look at to defend Lane Hutson's defensive ability, but his recoveries in the defensive zone are actually a lot higher than people give him credit for. And I mean, the offense is dynamic, right? Like, the one issue that I would bring up is just the fact he doesn't shoot enough on the power play. I really think that he diminishes what he can do as an offensive creator because nobody takes his shot seriously on the power play. And if you watch the Capitals series and watch some of his clips from around then, he just doesn't shoot the puck. And I think it was something like he had 100 and I think it was 70-ish shots during the season, and like 8 of them came on the power play or something ridiculous like that. Like, it's insane. And I should have pulled the number up. A good YouTuber would have pulled the number up. But it's insane how few of his shots came on the power play. And I really think that in order to make the Canadiens power play take the next step, I just think he needs to shoot more, because it's insane that he doesn't, and you can tell, like, it's a lot easier to defend because a lot of teams are playing a low box against Montreal's power play now, and Washington did it expertly. Like, the Canadiens had a lot of trouble on the power play in that series, and it's because they just didn't have to acknowledge Lane Hutson at all, because they knew he wasn't going to shoot the puck if he got it. And if he just starts shooting a little bit more, and making teams be a little bit more honest about him, then I think that it would create a more interesting. It would make defending it a lot more difficult, because the talent is going to be there. I worry that because of that lack of shooting on the power play, it could limit their effectiveness as an overall unit, and that means that, like, I'm talking about them going from like a very good power play to like the best in the league. And I think that's like the one area of his game that I would work on, and it's really not hard to do. It's just him shooting the puck, and just having the confidence to do that, right? Like, it's not to create goals. It's not even to create like high danger chances. It actually goes against a lot of what I believe on the power play. Like, I don't think your defenseman should be spamming shots from the blue line on the power play, but I think you need to take some so that you can keep the defense honest. Like, he's playing almost too much like a defenseman that I'd want to, where he's just not shooting at all. And I think that you need to find a balance there. And that's like the only criticism I have of his offensive game. If you don't believe me, you can go back and watch some of their power plays, and you'll see that like teams are playing very low on them when Lane Hutson's out there, because they're just not afraid of him shooting. And that's just like a little minor thing that would really, like, it seems like a minor thing, but spreading out the box means that everybody else has more space. And when you have guys like Ivan Demidov and Nick Suzuki and even Cole Caufield now to a lesser extent that are great puck handlers and can create space already, especially Ivan Demidov, like, he was still able to create space when he had 2 guys on him essentially on the penalty kill. But giving him more space would just like elevate everybody on this unit. So that's my one thing. But other than that, I mean, Lane Hutson's like there's nothing about his offensive game that needs to change. He just needs to do that again, and then they'll be like, he's fine. Caden Gooley, same thing. I've talked about it a little bit. First of all, his penalty kill numbers are very good, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that. Despite the fact that his defensive numbers they're fine, but his overall, like, as a third defenseman, if that's the role he's going to be playing, like, he's very good for that role. And he's also going into his age 24 season. Like, he's still very young. This team, like, the core nucleus of the Canadiens is so young. And that's the thing that's so exciting, is you have all these players and you're kind of like, oh, this guy's already really good. It's like, this guy's really good too. This guy's really good too. And it's like, oh, they're all like 25. Like Nick Suzuki's the oldest one, and he just finished his age 26 season. And he's the oldest one of that year. Like, and it's incredible. Like, it's so incredible how already elite the top end of this roster is, and how young they are. And again, like, Caden Gooley getting more mature, getting better, and being given less responsibility is like the best thing for him, because he's lived through being that number one guy on a blue line that was filled with American Hockey League players. Go back and look at the team he had in his first season. Like, it was bad. But now that like the team's starting to develop and people are starting to jump him in the lineup, most notably Hutson and now obviously Noah Dobson, it's actually like turning Gooley into a better defender, because he's already had the experience of playing at the highest point, so he understands what he can and can't do to like be successful, and now he's been given the reins to do it against like weaker competition. And it's really creating a defenseman that, again, like, even if David Reinbacher's a 4 on this team, like, there's nothing wrong with that, because you already have Caden Gooley, who can be a very, very good number 3. And I think that's kind of the best place for him. That's where he's going to slot in here, because I don't see him developing enough to jump either of the top 2, which is totally fine. Like, that's it. There's nothing wrong with having like 4 potential first pair defenseman. That's not an issue. And again, like I don't see Gooley as a first pair defenseman at this point, but he doesn't have to be, right? Like and in terms of like one of the 2 best defensemen on the team is what I mean. Like he can play first line minutes, but like he's not gonna, like I don't see him passing Hutson or Dobson as the 1 or 2 on this roster, which is that's not a problem. Like he's extremely good he might be one of the best number 3 defensemen in the NHL already. And they're still so young. Like this team's still developing. And as a 2-way defender, Caden Gooley is really good for that role, and he's shown that he can already eat minutes like crazy. So there's a lot of value there in terms of what he can bring to this blue line as they keep developing. Mike Matheson, on the other hand, is somebody that I probably would have traded like 2 summers ago. When he had like that extreme offensive, like crazy output, that's probably the year I would have moved him, because his numbers have dropped off a lot of late. Now, I still think that he can be a second pair defenseman as like a 4 at this point. But I think that especially with guys like Reinbacher coming up, like I think Mike Matheson's the guy to move, because they don't really need what he does anymore. Like his best value 2 years ago, and this is why I would have traded him, because they knew they had Lane Hutson coming up. His best value at that point was being the power play specialist, but now like he doesn't need to be that. Like they have enough guys who can run the power play. Like you're potentially going to have Noah Dobson and Ivan Demidov on your second unit. Like you don't need Mike Matheson to be on the power play. It just doesn't do anything for it. You can have Caden Gooley, Noah Dobson, and Demidov on there. Like it's not, or Patrick Laine, sorry, not Demidov, but still, regardless, like those are very good second power play guys. Like his best strength, and he's not even that good at it anymore. His defensive numbers are very poor. There's not a whole lot that he brings outside of like the experience, but like you just got Carrier to do that, so there's not a ton that he really brings to this team anymore. If there's a market for him, I'd move him right now. Maybe you can get yourself a friend, like another middle 6 center for him. But that's the one thing that like I really kind of look at here with Kent Hughes. I think this and the Kirby Dach trade are kind of the 2 that really raise flags for me, because like Frank Nazar, I love, and I've talked about him. But Mike Matheson just being on this team for like a year and a half too long is one of them. And I think they should have just believed that Lane Hutson was going to be what he was, and because I did, and I would have moved Matheson after that, like the very high point season he had. I think it was 2 years ago, because like this regression was pretty obvious to come. Like the numbers were pointing to it, and I think they were just kind of holding on too long for him for what he was. But like as your 4 this year, I don't think it's bad. It's just like he's kind of a black spot on what is a very, very well-rounded unit. And finally, Alexander Carrier, who again, like I've talked about, isn't going to be an offensive guy. He's not going to be a very big contributor, but his passing is actually pretty good. He does do a good job setting up offense, which for the guys that the Canadiens have does help them quite a bit in terms of what he can do in that sense. But his entries are actually pretty solid as well. So there's that, and they got significantly better once he went to Montreal. Like his controlled entries and everything got significantly better after the trade. He is a very, very strong third pair defenseman, and that's really what the Canadiens need. And I think it was a phenomenal trade when they brought him in. Just another one of those moves where it's like, and I've talked about this a lot with some of the teams that we've talked about, right? Like the Cody Ceci signing was a big one that we discussed, and just how insane that contract is, and what they had to give to get there, and just like, and the fact that it's a third pair defenseman, it doesn't really matter. But like Alexander Carrier is a third pair defenseman. He is worlds better than what Cody Ceci is, and really, really fits what this team needs. And it's moves like that, it's moves like the Carrier trade that really give me faith that Kent Hughes will be able to fill out the bottom half of this roster with guys that they need. And guys that are going to be really helpful, because he was able to go get somebody like Alexander Carrier, who like perfectly did exactly what this team needed. And you really saw, like, as much as people like to talk about Patrick Laine being kind of the spark plug that
that reshaped what the Canadiens were doing last season. I think it was really getting Alexander Carrier in that really helped stabilize Montreal and gave them a guy who they could just put out in defensive situations. Like, he's not flashy, he's not putting up great numbers, but somebody they could just rely on to be a good defender, and actually a good defender, not just a physical defender. And he really did that exceptionally well. And I talked a lot about it last year in the video that I think getting rid of Kovacevic was a mistake, and he looked very good when he was healthy in New Jersey. But Alexander Carrier kind of fills that spot really well. And it's moves like that really give me faith in what Ken Hughes is doing. And it's a move that's not very flashy, and people aren't really going to talk about a ton, especially when you're bringing in guys like Noah Dobson. But being able to acquire guys like this for very minimal, who are going to be very effective for your team, is just a real good indication for what Montreal's going to look like as this team starts to really move into the Stanley Cup contender tier in the next couple of years. Finally, Arbor Xhekaj, who everybody loves to either absolutely adore or absolutely hate on. I'll just say this: as a sixth, seventh defenseman who can come in and play like a couple minutes a night and be effective enough and be fine, is like he's fine in that role. This idea that like every team in the league would benefit from an Arbor Xhekaj on their roster is like insane to me. I don't fully understand that argument. I get that he's like unique and he's fun, but like in terms of like what he does on the ice, there's not a whole lot there. Like if somebody's best trait is getting your bench excited, it's tough for me to really rely on that, right? Like, he's somebody who's putting up pretty pedestrian numbers against extremely weak competition. And like, I'm sorry, but when you're trying to compete for a Stanley Cup, like, look at what the Florida Panthers did, right? Like, the Florida Panthers had 0 players on their day-to-day Stanley Cup, or like if you were to max that roster out in terms of like everybody is healthy and everybody is playing the roles that they were brought in to play, there was nobody on that team that would be just playing a couple minutes a night against completely weak competition just to be an energy guy. Like, that player didn't exist. The player didn't exist on Tampa. That player didn't exist on Vegas. I guess you might be able to argue like Kolazar is that guy on Vegas, but even then, like, his numbers are fine for what he is. But the point is this, right? Like, Arbor Xhekaj is extremely fun. I get it. He's fine as like your sixth defenseman, but you need to be good everywhere around the lineup, and playing a guy against like the bottom barrel competition, and just being serviceable just isn't going to cut it for, winning in the margins. And he can be fun. He's energetic. I don't hate him, but like, I think that his value is going to wear out if he can't move into being like an actual sturdy third pair defenseman in the next year or two. And that's unfortunate because he's a fun player, right? If he can find that balance and just develop into a better defenseman, then he'll bring a ton of value to the Canadiens all of a sudden. But if he's only there to be an energy guy, the ceiling on that bottom end of the blue line is pretty low, and that's just kind of what it is. And that, like, if you look at the teams that are winning Stanley Cups, right, like they're able to maximize every single point of their lineup. And if you have a spot on that lineup that isn't being maximized, it's going to be hard to win out in the margins. Now, I do think that the Canadiens at their full power, the top 4 of the blue line is going to be so overwhelmingly good that like it might not matter very much, but still, like, there's no reason to not try to be the best you can in every single position. And I think that there's a cap on what Arbor Xhekaj can do in terms of what he brings on the ice to this team. Finally, the goalies, and I talked about it earlier. Sam Montembeault is one of my favorite goalies in the NHL, period, and we're going to talk about that. Jacob Dobson was fine for the role that he was asked to play. He's fine as like a fringe backup until Jacob Fowler comes in. I don't think he's going to be this world-beating backup goalie. But goalies are weird. Maybe I'll be wrong. But there's not much talk about him. He was fine for what he was, and I think he'll get a shot to take that spot again, but I don't expect crazy things out of him. But Sam Montembeault is great. And now I just want to show this if you're watching on YouTube, but I'm going to read it out because it's phenomenal, and it's why I'm so high on what Sam Montembeault can do. From 2023 to 2025, so the last 3 seasons, or the last 2 seasons, apologies, Connor Hellebuyck, Anthony Stolarz, Sam Montembeault, and Igor Shesterkin are the top 4 goalies in terms of goals saved above expected. Anthony Stolarz only played 61 games, so I take that with a bit of grain of salt. Connor Hellebuyck's at 123, Montembeault's at 103, so 20 games less, and Igor Shesterkin's at 116. So in terms of game played, like, we can kind of ignore Stolarz because he was a backup for a good portion of that. Like, this really was his only true season, like, as a quote-unquote starter in Toronto. So I'm less hyped up on that. But, like, you talk about, like, the save percentages for Igor Shesterkin was a 907. 901 was Montembeault, so very similar in terms of those. His goal saved above expected is 49.18. Igor's is 45.95. They both have a 93 Fenwick save percentage. Igor Shesterkin's is 0.2 higher. So, like, we're talking about him being compared to a goalie that everybody thought was going to be the best goalie in the league forever, and that's Igor Shesterkin, right? Like, his numbers compared to Shesterkin are extremely similar. They faced very similar in terms of expected goals against. If you go to per game, they're basically identical. Their save percentages are basically identical. Their Fenwick save percentages are basically identical. Their goal saved above expected is essentially identical. Montembeault is actually higher with a few less games played, and few expected goals against, by the way, which makes that actually, a bit more impressive. Again, like, Anthony Stolarz is there too, but his games played and his expected goals against are so small that it's hard for me to buy into that as much. But, like, even if you go to a 3-year sample size, Montembeault's, like, in there with guys like Hellebuyck, Shesterkin, Ilya Sorokin's up there as well, despite his bad season last season. And Linus Ullmark. Like, those are the goalies that Montembeault's been in conversations with for 3 seasons. Like, it's phenomenal that this guy is being laughed off of Team Canada as the third goalie. I think that's ridiculous. I think that I probably would still go with Jordan Binnington as the starter, but, like, man, the disrespect to Sam Montembeault because the name value just isn't there is ridiculous. He's been a top 5 goalie in the NHL, top 5-6 goalie in the NHL for 3 seasons now, in terms of, his goal saved above expected. And he's been playing starter minutes in those roles, unlike a guy like Anthony Stolarz. I really think that we need to start treating Montembeault like a legitimate goalie, because the fact that he's been able to do that consistently now for 3 seasons is something that we don't see a lot with goalies, right? Like, we've seen that only in guys like Connor Hellebuyck and Igor Shesterkin and Ilya Sorokin, and a couple years ago in guys like Saros and John Gibson. Like, those are the goalies that are able to continuously sustain this kind of play, and Montembeault's been able to do it for 3 seasons, and I don't see a reason why that should stop. I think he's going to have a better overall team around him this season, and I really think if he can continue to play at this level, he should really start to get a look at as being one of the better goalies in the league. Finally, the power play. I kind of been touching on it the whole time, but it's a fun unit, right? Like, now, Puckpedia had Slafkovsky on the first unit and Demidov on the second, but, like, the spoils of riches on the power play should really, really help boost the power play up this season in terms of projections. Now, they're not quite there yet, so that's why they're a little bit lower on my rankings. But the projected boom of this power play is really easy to see. In terms of the defensive play, though, like, aside from Sam Montembeault being, like, a phenomenal penalty kill goalie, this team does really lack penalty killers, and that is a concern. And again, like we've talked about with losing what Joel Armia did for this team, I really think that they weren't able to replace that, at least for now. Now, there is some potential development that can happen. Like, if Kirby Dach can play a full season, maybe he can develop into that. Nick Suzuki, again, same thing. Caden Gooley's already pretty solid, so, like, he's somebody that you could look to potentially jump up into the top unit. But I really think that losing out on what Armia did for this penalty kill is going to hurt them, and not being able to replace it. But And maybe Zach Leduc gets a look on the penalty kill as well, just because his 5-on-5 defensive numbers are pretty good. But overall, like, the penalty kill is definitely a concern for me, especially for a team that already doesn't play defense particularly well. And again, I think part of that is systematic, but part of it's just like the talent isn't quite there in terms of what they need on the penalty kill. So there we go. That is team number 16, the Montreal Canadiens. I think the Canadiens are super, super fun. They're a team that I don't quite know. There is enough questions for me to worry slightly about them missing the playoffs this season. But in the grand scheme of things, I really don't think that's that big of a deal. As long as the team doesn't overreact and like fire Martin St. Louis if they miss the playoffs or like trade substantial pieces away. I actually don't think it's that big of a deal if they end up missing the playoffs this season, as long as they're like in the hunt, which they should be. But I do think that like the concerns at second line center and the depth scoring is something that we had last season, wasn't really addressed, and could come back to haunt them. But overall, like the top end of this roster is so good already, and has so much potential that it really doesn't, like, this is kind of another year where as long as they're in the mix, I'm really not concerned about it. And they could easily be a playoff team. But in a really tough Atlantic division, it's going to be difficult. And with a Metro, that should be better too. I mean, teams like the Rangers who missed the playoffs, I still haven't talked about yet. So there is potential for them to, potentially take a step back because of the development of some teams that just weren't as good as they probably should have been last season. But overall, like, I'm really not concerned about Montreal long term, despite what kind of shaky performance they may or may not have this season. I really don't think in the grand scheme of things it's going to matter all that much. But let me know what you think down below about the Montreal Canadiens, and we'll see you for team number 15 in just a couple days.